Hi everyone and welcome to my coverage of Game 5 from the Chess World Championship match 2013 between Vishy Anand and Magnus Carlsen. After 4 draws, a couple of which were very high level and interesting games, the chess world was longing for a decisive result today. Yesterday was a rest day, with the players coming back renewed for the 5th game and all eyes returned to Chennai. Carlsen had the white pieces and deviated from his first 2 games with white, playing c4 instead of the knight f3 that we've seen in the first 2 games. Anand had been answering this knight f3 with d5, so perhaps this move is played in part to discourage that option. So Anand answered with e6, and we're going into the semi-Slav variation of the Queen's Gambit declined by transposition after d4, d5, knight c3 and c6. So it's important to note here that black has not played knight f6, and this gives white the aggressive option of e4, which is what Carlsen played. It's a double-edged move because it's weakening on the d file, in particular the d4 pawn and square. It's not as common as some of the other quieter lines such as knight f3 here instead, and it was great to see it from Carlsen, who was clearly in a fighting mood. So d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop b4 check, so standard for this line, and now knight c3. Also possible as a gambit is bishop d2, allowing queen takes d4, now bishop takes b4, queen takes e4 check, and bishop e2. It's dangerous to take g2 here, and this leads to some very sharp lines. It's perhaps possible that Anand's team had done some preparation in this variation, and it's known as the Marshall counter gambit, after Frank Marshall, the great American player from Capablanca's time. In any case, Carlsen appears to have sidestepped the worst of any prep with his move knight c3 to break the check. So c5, so attacking the center, and now Carlsen put the question to the bishop with a3. So bishop a5, and now knight f3, adding support to d4, knight f6, normal development. So bishop e3, adding pressure to c5, and now knight c6, in turn adding pressure to d4. And here, a nice move from Carlsen, queen d3. He clearly wanted a sharp game. His intention here is to castle long, and then storm the black kingside with pawns. It should be noted too that white doesn't really have anything after d takes c5 here. So bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, queen a5, attacking c3, and this is probably equal already for black. And as is often the case, it's better for white to keep the tension for as long as possible. So after queen d3, Anand played c takes d4, finally relieving the central tension. And this gives the center to white after knight takes d4, and he has a very active position here already after 11 moves, right out of the opening. And his 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side also counts for something as well. So what's Anand up to? His idea is to play knight g4, and this is going to win the bishop pair, because obviously this bishop can't move, or the knight on d4 is dropping. So Carlsen allowed this to happen, and Anand is using time to gain the bishop pair here, and so Carlsen will have compensation for having lost the bishop pair. So he continued with his plan, castling long. Now this d file is also very strong for white. So knight takes e3 and f takes e3, which is tactically forced. If queen takes e3, then bishop b6. Knight is pinned, and this is problematic. White has to sack a pawn, pretty much, but it just gets very messy. So obviously that's no good. So f takes e3. And now bishop c7, which was a slight inaccuracy from Anand. He's already used a fair amount of extra moves in the opening, winning the bishop pair, and moving this bishop a second time is taking another move. And presumably what he's worried about because of this move is a d6 hole, which white is aiming to use here. And it was actually okay just to castle instead here, and you know, black could almost claim equality even after that. As we know, Carlsen is a superb endgame player, and he now took his chance to simplify the position considerably with knight takes c6, and after b takes c6, queen takes d8, forces bishop takes d8, and now he played bishop e2 with the idea of playing bishop f3 to attack c6, which is, you know, a weak pawn. So if we stop to take a look at the position for a moment, we have the interesting imbalance of knight against bishop, although the bishop pair should give black some play, at least in theory. White has the d file and also the semi-open f file to work with, as well as the aforementioned 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side. He's ahead in development, although that isn't such an advantage because it's a fairly simplified position and the queens have come off. Positions like these and even further simplified positions are where Carlsen really shines on the chessboard. His endgame is probably the most significant thing that sets him above the rest of the elite grandmasters. Many players of his strengths love to attack and be aggressive, looking for combinations and playing aggressively to force mate. Whilst Carlsen can of course play this way, he's absolutely happy to play these quiet endgame positions and grind out as much as possible from them. His intuition and understanding with regard to such endings is of the greatest in history. It's no exaggeration to say that. It's certainly at least shoulder to shoulder with Fischer and Capablanca. It's especially significant because young players in particular, you know, just love wild middle games and crazy attacking play. But as I said, Carlsen appears to be most in his element with a small endgame advantage. I've lost count of the number of times I've seen him routinely play a level opening, equal enough middle game, and then slowly but surely grind down and defeat the world's elite when the endgame arrives. It's truly astonishing to watch how he creates something out of nothing, as many great masters have been able to do before him. But anyway, to get back to the game, Anand continued here with king e7, which is a strange looking move, but the king is safe here. Black can move his bishops to connect the rooks, bishop b6, bishop b7, and then the rooks will be connected, something along those lines. And then he can play rook d8 and an exchange on the d file, and the rooks coming off should favour him here. Ideally he wants to go into two bishops against bishop and knight endgame with pawns still on both sides of the board, you know, for the best theoretical chances of winning the endgame. So bishop f3 from Carlsen, attacking c6, so bishop d7, and now knight e4, which aims again for the d6 square, which is a hole in the black position. And you know, white is centralizing nicely here. As usual, Carlsen is playing calm positional chess, simple to understand and yet impossible to imitate. Anand answered bishop b6, threatening to win e3 with check. This is a weak pawn in white's position, and you know, this is a provocative move because white can answer with c5, just gaining a tempo on the bishop, and furthermore supporting d6. And in actual fact, this more or less forces f5, which is what Anand played, and this weakens e6 and allows white to go into a slightly better endgame. But as I said, black has little choice here. For example, if he plays bishop c7, then knight d6, or even rook d2 and rook h d1, and white is looking very good here, especially bishop takes d6, he takes d6, king d8, and now for example a4 with a very comfortable endgame advantage. Okay, so f5 is what was played anyway, and Carlsen played a c takes b6, which is the best move. It forces f takes e4, and now a nice little finesse, b7, and what this does is it stops a takes b6, so it keeps these pawns fragmented and weak. So rook a b8, and now bishop takes e4, rook takes b7, so the pawns, you know, remain equal. And now Carlsen played rook h f1, so now he has control of both of the open files. he has a better bishop given these pawns. It's blocking the activity of the black bishop. And you know, he also has 3 pawn islands, whereas black has 4. And you know, included in those 4 pawn islands are 3 isolated pawns. So you know, gradually Carlsen is accumulating small advantages. However, the position is still very close to equal here. Black is also active on the b file, and there's no immediate way for white to win any material or anything like that. So for all intents and purposes, it at least seems equal at this point. So Anand played rook b5, taking over the 5th rank, and also given the option of doubling on the b file. And you know, there's ideas like rook e5 here. So Carlsen played rook f4, and in turn he's aiming to double on the f file. As I said, one of the threats after rook b5 was to play rook e5, and if the bishop moves, then e3 is dropping. And this move defends the bishop, so rook e5 wouldn't come with tempo. But this move, rook f4, is also a provocative move because black can kick it with either e5 or g5, which is what Anand played, is g5 here. And this weakens f6, but Anand saw no immediate problem with that. So rook f3 from Carlsen, and now h5 from Anand, gaining space on the king side and hoping perhaps to clarify the pawn structure there. So this allows rook d f1, threatens rook f7 check. So bishop e8, and now bishop c2 liberates the e pawn and aims to reroute the bishop to a better diagonal. So Anand played rook c5, pinning the bishop, and Carlsen invaded on the f file with rook f6, and this applies pressure to this pawn here on e6 that his previous play has weakened. So you know, it's a logical continuation of that, and also of doubling on the f file. So h4 from Anand, continuing on the queen side, and so now Carlsen plays e4, and after a5, and the point of this move is just to get a little bit of grip on the queen side, is tying down b4 a little bit, and that has some concrete ideas that we'll see in a moment. So king d2 just to break this pin, and the idea is to play bishop b3 and add pressure to e6. So rook b5 stops bishop b3 and puts some pressure on b2, and obviously white can't play b4 now because of this a5 move. So we see what Anand is thinking here. So b3 is what Carlsen played. Just gains a little space, protects the pawn with the bishop, and he's going to reorganize his pieces now, as we'll see in a second. So bishop h5 from Anand. This is a nice move, the best move. You know, at least 9 times out of 10, both of the players here are finding the best moves every time. The idea of this move is to keep an eye on f7 first and foremost, but also it's aiming for d1, and black wants to exchange the light square bishops because his is worse, and then the rook endgame is probably going to be a draw, which is what Anand is looking for here. So king c3 to protect b3, and if allowed play bishop d3 to c4, and then white would have a nice position. So Anand stopped that idea with rook c5 check, and this playing b3 also allows king b2. So now white still has this idea of bishop d3 c4, and Anand played a rook d8 to stop bishop d3, and also with the idea of rook d2 pinning and winning the bishop. So Carlsen took a moment for prophylaxis here. Rook 1 f2, preventing the penetration to d2, and now rook d4 from Anand. And in a press conference after the game, he said that he thought this was a bad move, but the computers seem to disagree, and they give this as the right way to play the position. And in any case, black has suddenly become very active here, and you know, white has this f file, but these rooks kind of make the white king's position a little bit uncomfortable, and it's hard to believe that there's nothing even concrete or forcing here. Objectively, the position is still fairly level, with only the smallest of edges to white. So rook h6 from Carlsen, attacking the bishop, and black has already played to trade it off. So bishop d1. Carlsen, however, does not want to trade bishops, so bishop b1. Now rook b5, and again we see the reasoning behind this a5 push, stopping b4, and so now black has the attack on b3. But Carlsen found, there's a saving move, c3, king c3, and he found it, and this attacks the loose rook. So maybe this is why Anand didn't like rook d4, because now his initiative is slowed down a little bit. So c5 to defend the rook, and this also binds b4, and threatens rook takes b3, which is actually mate now. So obviously white has to defend against that. So Carlsen played a rook b2 to defend, and then came e5 from Anand with the idea of playing a4. So rook g6 attacking g5, and Anand answered with an attack of his own in a4. If instead g4 to defend the pawn with the bishop, now white has time for bishop d3, and on c3 the king is supporting this, and then it's going to go to it's attacking the rook first of all, but then it can go to c4, and white has improved his position, and obviously black doesn't want to allow this, so he plays a4 instead, and this means that white has to do something about this. Well, actually he doesn't have to, but it means that black has a threat. So rook takes g5 anyway is what Carlsen played, which is the correct move to retain the slight edge that white has here. If he plays instead b takes a4, then black equalizes. Rook takes b2, king takes b2, bishop takes a4, rook takes g5, king f6, rook f5 check, king e6, and this should be equal for black, despite the pawn deficit. There's enough activity here to hold. So rook takes g5 from Carlsen, now rook takes b3 from Anand, and a forcing sequence. Rook takes b3, bishop takes b3. So Carlsen has managed to grind a pawn out of the world champion, but black is very active here, and both Anand and the computers felt that there's total compensation for the pawn already after rook takes e5, and that black is equal here, and as I said, the computers agree with that. So it's check anyway, and black has to defend the c5 pawn, so king d6 is best, and now rook h5 threatens to win h4. So Anand answered with rook d1, attacking the bishop, and so Carlsen throws in e5 check, the best move, and the rook is protecting the pawn here, and now it's a pass pawn, and the fact that it's moved gives the bishop a lot more scope on this diagonal. So king d5, and this is obviously the best square for the king. If it goes to a different light square, then Carlsen can throw in a check and win the h pawn, so obviously that's no good, and moving to the second rank is just too passive. As always in the endgame, centralization and coordination is key. So bishop h7 from Carlsen with the idea bishop g8 check, which is going to win a pawn on b3 at the moment. And here Anand played rook c1 check, which is a definite inaccuracy. Much better was rook a1 to attack a3 with approximate equality. Anand's thinking is that after Carlsen's move, king b2, he can play rook g1 and take with tempo with the king on b2. However, there's an interesting nuance that Carlsen found here. He prides himself on punishing any mistakes from his opponent, and he's able to dish some out to Anand here after this rook c1 check and rook g1 continuation. First of all by playing bishop g8 with check, and after king c6, not taking straight away, he plays rook h6 check first, and this is engine perfect play. Many people would have snapped up the bishop and the pawn right away, and this move forces the king to an inferior square, especially after king d7. Much better was king b5, although white is still looking good after bishop takes b3, a takes b3, not rook takes g2 or bishop c2. White keeps the piece, so a takes b3, king takes b3, c4 check, king c3, and this should be an almost definite win for whites, but it gives more chances for black than after Anand's move, king d7. So bishop takes b3, a takes b3, king takes b3. Carlsen wins a second pawn after rook takes g2 and rook takes h4, and suddenly this position is hopeless for black, and white has a technical win, something that Carlsen very rarely fails to convert. In this instance he immediately found the strongest plan as well. After Anand's king e6 attacking the e pawn, he simply lets it go with a4, so that after king takes e5 he can push again with a5, and he can follow up with rook a4. And how is black stopping the pawn from queening? And Anand is already tied to passivity. He can't push his pawn. His king and the rook have it fully covered, and he tried king d6, but it's kind of like the truth of the position here is that he's helpless against Carlsen's advance of this a pawn. The rook is good on g2, but other than that black doesn't have anything here. So king d6 is obviously trying to get back to stop this pawn, so rook h7 just prevents any further headway by the king to the first rank, so he went back to d5, and this is so, one of the reasons play king d5 is after a6 there's c4 check, but it's futile. After king c3, the king is safe on this square, there's no checks, and just no danger here. Anand tried rook a2, but now comes a7, and the pawn is protected by the rook. And Anand tried bringing his king over now to join in the attack on the pawn with king c5, but after h4 we see the classic endgame principle of the problem of having two weaknesses. Often in an endgame one weakness is not fatal, but if you have two weaknesses there's nothing you can do, and the rook is very nice on h7 supporting both of these pawns. And obviously in this instance, of course, black cannot defend against both passed pawns queening, and seeing this Anand played king d5 and then finally resigned, accepting that it was hopeless. Truthfully, there's nothing else for him to do here. If rook a3 check, white just plays king b2, and the rook has to stay on the a file, so rook a4 and now h5. And there's not even stalemate threats here or anything like that, so black is completely busted, and it was a fantastic game from Carlsen, who won in his classic style, going from a level middle game into a crushing end game. Okay, he was helped by small mistakes from Anand, but you cannot win in chess unless your opponent makes mistakes. Carlsen played a flawless game whilst constantly keeping the pressure on Anand and punishing the tiniest of errors with expert precision and skill. So Carlsen takes the lead after game 5. This is sure to bring the match to life, because now Anand will have to take far more risks in order to even the score. Finally the deadlock is broken, and is great to see. Carlsen, of course, was very happy after the match, and is easy to understand. At the age of just 22, he's taken a step towards eternal glory with this brilliant victory. Incidentally, it's been reported that this match is breaking all kinds of chess records, most notably in terms of audience, with over 1 billion people having tuned in to see the match so far, and it's topping sites such as Twitter and other ones on that kind of level and of that kind of prestige. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure the huge population of India is partly responsible for this, but it's still an amazing fact. So, kudos to Carlsen for leaping ahead. It's hard not to feel some sympathy for Anand, but the match is far from over yet, with 7 rounds left to play. It's going to take everything he's got to claw his way back into this, and it will be fascinating to see how play unravels tomorrow morning. Okay, that's it for this round. I hope you enjoyed the analysis, and I'll be back shortly. Thanks very much.